Effectively, you need not one, but two handkerchiefs. Two handkerchiefs. Yeah. Some of you may have already figured this out. If you're familiar with some of Marx's later work. Two handkerchiefs, and they must both be different colours. That's very important. It's no good. No good just one of them being a different colour. So what you do before the show begins, wherever you happen to be, you take one of the handkerchiefs and you push it down into your fist like this. This is what we call the preparation. It must be done in complete and utter privacy, or as near to it as you can get anyway. You could do it at a meeting of the Nigel Farage fan club. And you push the red handkerchief into your fist like that. Then, once you've done that, you're ready to begin. But one thing you must remember once you get on stage is to keep this hand very tightly closed, because if you open it, some of the more astute and progressive members of the audience will see the red handkerchief and they'll know how the trick is done. So then you having done that, you come on with your blue handkerchief, take the blue handkerchief, push it into the top of your fist like that. As you do so, very carefully you pull the red one out the other side. Couldn't be simpler, could it? Blue one in the top there, red one out there. A little tip though, if you do decide to do this trick, which I can see a lot of you probably will, try not to talk too much during it. No, really. A lot of magicians spoil this with a lot of patter. I hate that. It's not necessary. Not necessary. It's a visual trick. You can see the politics comes across visually. I'm doing the opposite of what the bourgeois magician did. I'm going from blue to red in true socialist manner, thus making the political point very effectively. Although it's not subtle, I'll admit that. But in these days, you know, we can't afford subtlety. I could actually, should I? No, I don't. Well, why should you? Yes, on the other hand, just a minute. All right, yeah, just, okay. No, yes, all right. Sorry, I'm going through a process of reorganisation at the moment. It's possible, it's just possible, that some part of me, during the course of this act, some part of me may actually split off and form an independent group. I don't know. And maybe join with the Tories. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen. You probably won't notice the difference. Because it will be a very small and insignificant part of me. What I was just trying to decide whether I will tell you, because I get to this point in this act, I get to right this point, and it suddenly brings it all back, and it's a poignant moment for me, because it takes me back. Because this trick that I'm performing here, this is the trick that I first performed many years ago for Fidel Castro. Yeah, well, no, it's all right. No. Well, he said he was Fidel Castro. Well, what he actually said was, if you're a magician... Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's all right. Never show the two handkerchiefs separately, because then it's obvious how the trick is done. Push the blue handkerchief in the top there, pull the red one out there, push that right down into your fist like that. Then you can put that away, stand back, and wait for the applause. Thank you. Now a trick with a large scarf. I don't know why I do all that. It's got nothing to do with the trick. It is, in fact, it's a bourgeois flourish. It's a leftover. I can't help it. It's a leftover from when I was a bourgeois magician, because I am internally a mass of contradictions. some of which emerge during the course of this act, and some of which I save up for the journey home, or the next Labour government, whichever is the sooner. Although I can't be sure. I mean, it's unlikely that there will be a Labour government before I get home. Although, who knows, because I'm travelling on Virgin trains, so I don't know if you can get a postal ballot on those things. Large scarf, tie a knot in the scarf. Now this knot that I've tied here, this represents the knotty problems of society, and the question is, how do we solve those knotty problems? Well, there are magic words here, and the magic words, as you probably already guessed, the magic words are, of course, mass action for a radical transformation of society, from a society based primarily on profit to a society based on human need. So can you all join in after 3? I'll just count to 3, then you come in as the voice of the masses with mass. I won't repeat it. That would be patronising. Patronising. So here we go. Here we go. Not here we go. Don't say here we go. Remember, we tried that during the miners' strike. Here we go, over and over again, and it didn't work. So after 3, mass action, etc. 1, 2, 3. It's a good left-wing audience. Everybody's saying something different. I'll tell you what we're going to do, because I was told this was going to be a Vanguard audience, but I don't know. What we'll do, we'll simplify it down to one word that you can all join in with. And that one word, which means basically the same, that one word is solidarity. So can we all join in with solidarity after 3? 1, 2, 3. Solidarity! There we are, knotty problem solved. Thank you. Now this next trick, I don't know how to introduce. This is one of the most political tricks I do. So if you're at all squeamish about politics, try to avoid watching it and the rest of life, because this trick is actually an adaptation of a passage from Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, pages 31 to 37 of the Lawrence and Wishart edition. In case you want to look it up afterwards, or some people already Googling it. Although I think you'll find that Karl Marx suggests you should use slightly thicker rope, which has been commented on in various academic pieces of writing. So three pieces of rope, a long one, a medium-sized one, and a short one, and they each represent a different class in society. This very small one here, although it's very small, it is immensely powerful in our society because it owns the means of production, distribution and exchange. This is the capitalist class, the bosses, the bourgeoisie, the very rich. Right? Right, it's good, I'm glad. I know it's not. I know the pantomime season is over, but you're doing well. Nobody said, "Oh no, it's not." You know, it's. Yeah. Okay. This one here, somewhat larger, an amalgam of several classes: small shopkeepers, large landowning peasants. I can't go into the whole sociology of it, but this, as you can see now, and this one here, the largest of them all. This is the working classes. Right? So, few in, I can see, or their representatives, I don't know. And now, as you can see, there's a constant state of antagonism between the workers and the bosses, with the middle classes not knowing which side to jump on. Stay there, stay there. This is a graphic illustration of the class nature of society at the moment. Actually, I'll tell you, I do this act and variations of it in all sorts of places. Not many weeks, but all sorts of places. And universities, for example, I do this act. And the sociology courses, the students watch this, and if they've taken in that bit, then they're let off for terms reading. Because it's good, because it gets them through the degree that much quicker. They still pay the 9,000 quid, so, you know, it's obviously win-win all round. So now you've probably noticed by this time how good I am at dealing with hecklers. I think it must have because nobody's heckled me. And there is a reason for this. It's because, that's because see, these people here have also done the sort of training that I've done, but less advanced. Because, like most of us alternative performers, I've been trained in this. I go to a big house in the country with a lot of, and we sit round the circle. We have to heckle one another. Then we have to come back very quickly with a reply that's not only razor sharp, but also politically correct, which is a very difficult thing to do. But I've learned a lot, and one of the things I've learned during this process is that to deal effectively with hecklers, you must be able to anticipate, to know in advance the points in your act where somebody's going to shout something out, so that you can come straight back at them. Like, for instance, I know that at this point in the act, almost invariably, in an audience of about this size, somebody will shout out, well, what happens in a revolutionary or pre-revolutionary situation now? And they'll think I haven't got an answer. You were going to say it, weren't you? That's why I'm sitting at the front. Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you precisely what happens in that particular conjuncture that you've just outlined so succinctly. So I'm not intimidating you at all, am I? Are you sure? Because I'll criticise myself if I am. No, okay, well, I'll do it later anyway. I'll tell you what happens in a revolutionary situation. As you can see, the ropes are getting confused. I'm confused. No doubt you're also confused. This represents society in a state of confusion, in that state where it would just take that conscious effort on the part of the masses to change the whole nature of society from one based on profit to one based on human need. In case you don't recognise it, this is the point at which the TUC usually tries to settle for about 2%. But if that doesn't happen, we should find that we have three equal classes, three equal pieces of rope. Thank you. Thanks. Now those people who applauded there are the reformists in the audience. Because as the rest of you understand, this is not a satisfactory situation. Three classes, though they may appear equal, the revolutionary process must continue, and indeed will continue, with more confusion, until eventually we should find we have just one class. Right, oh sorry. We have oh, there it is. We have just one class, or a classless society. Thank you. It's difficult. I do find it easier these days to do magic because I have become an almost an impossible sort of figure. Apparently, I keep reading this that I don't actually exist. Because I'm a Jewish member of the Labour Party who supports Jeremy Corbyn. So being non-existent, I find it easier. As a magician, I do have to, as a socialist magician, I have to do other things, obviously, to make a living, and I have a My hobby is creating weapons of mass destruction. These missiles, you know, it's a good sideline because you create these weapons, and there's always a market for them in the way it works, and you know people don't, you know, you sell them to government, so it doesn't matter if the people in a particular country are poor, whether it's Saudi Arabia or wherever. So I can keep creating. Of course, one day I suppose I might get round to saying the magic words: mass action for a radical transformation of society, from a society based primarily on profit to a society based on human need. And there we go. Now, time for some surplus value, I think. Let's do this one. The factory. The factory in our society is like an empty box into which day after day, week after week go the workers. I've got 2 workers here. They're going into the box. No, I don't want to go in. In you go. and you. No, I feel alienated. Do you? Yeah. Well, see, this is capitalist society. As a worker, you have no control over the means of production. Therefore, you're bound to feel alienated. Oh, I didn't realise that. I'll go in then. Right, there we are. That's the educational process we're just going through. You all right? Yeah, we're all right. You sure? Yeah. Keep working then. Oh, all right. Yeah. Shut up. And what happens once they get inside is that they find that the boss takes a surplus from their labour, which the boss keeps, and they come out at the end of the week exactly as they were at the beginning, because they've spent all the money they earned, and the factory once again is an empty box. Now, I'm glad you didn't clap there. Really, a lot less sophisticated audiences do. Yeah, really, no, they burst into torrents of applause, but I can see you've been through a bit of a learning process in the earlier part of the act. Probably by the end of this act, you won't clap anything I do. And that is how I'll know I've succeeded. But anyway, the following week, or it could be 2 weeks later or a month, I couldn't give you an exact time scale on this. It's more a sort of allegory anyway, so I don't know why you asked, but sometime later they go in, no, I don't want to go in, just get inside. No, oh, no, I don't want to, no, why do we have to go in through the window anyway? Just get inside. I want to see the health and safety record out this, just get in, you're a troublemaker, you are. And what happens once they get inside, they find that as far as the boss is concerned, they no longer exist, because they've been made redundant. But although some people almost clap then. See, it just shows it's not a smooth transition from, you know, to get to a higher state of consciousness. We're all slipping all the time. And what was I going to say? Yeah. So so now they've disappeared. They're on 0 hours contract, so you can't see them. But it wouldn't be surprising, after this has happened a few times, if one day they came out somewhat changed. Now, before I go, I think what I should do now is to introduce the person who's the inspiration behind many, if not all, of these tricks. Are you there? Yeah, I'm there. Right. Now, this is Karl Marx, in case you don't know. It's not Father Christmas. Over the Christmas period, I had so many problems with this. People think it was Father Christmas, mainly in the play groups, but I don't know what's in the national curriculum. But anyway, Hello, Carl. Hello. How are you? I'm all right. You enjoying the afternoon? Well, it's a bit sad, but I'm enjoying it nevertheless. I like the songs. I sort of enjoyed this a bit. Yeah, good. Actually, Carl, well, I was just wondering. What were you wondering, Ian? I was wondering if in your day, in my day, whether you ever had anything like this, or like socialist music, songs, humour, or even socialist conjuring tricks. Well, you had socialist songs and music and humour and that sort of thing, did you? Yeah, we didn't have socialist conjuring tricks, though. You didn't know. Although what? Although it's a little known fact. Tell us what the little known fact is. I'm going to. Go on then. Yeah, all right. It's a little known fact. You said, yeah, listen, why do you keep interrupting me? Well, Carl, yes, the reason, yes, I'd like to know the reason. The reason I keep interrupting you, what is it? It's because I read in the book, the book on ventriloquism. What did you read? I read that you have to keep up a quick crossflow. What? A quick crossflow patter. Oh, I see. So that it looks as though we're talking at the same time. Oh. Oh, no. Don't encourage him. Personally, I think you should leave that out. Why is that? You think it's too illusionistic? It builds up too strong an illusion of two people talking to one another, thus leading people into that false state of consciousness that you were discussing on the Virgin train up here. Is it? No, it's not that. It's just that they can see your lips moving. Right? Yeah. Have you ever thought of using a picture of Marcel Marceau? I think that'd suit your style of ventriloquism. And never mind about that. What was the little known fact that you were going to tell us? The little known fact was that originally I wanted my theories done as conjuring tricks. Is that right? Absolutely right. What was it that stopped you? Engels. Engels, yeah. What? Friedrich Engels, your collaborator? Yeah. In what way? Well, I used to come home after a day's work at the British Museum, and I'd come in, and I'd stand there, I'd say, Engels? Engels? Engels! Engels! Because he didn't live at my house. Did he not? No, he was somewhere around here actually, Salford or somewhere. And I was in London, and so I'd have to write to him. You'd write, yeah, I'd say, look here, Engels, I've discovered this important new principle. We've got to get it out to the general public somehow. What about this idea? What about bringing it out as a rope trick? A rope trick, yes. A rope trick, yeah. And what would his reactions be then? He'd say no. No, he wouldn't. He wasn't. He was against it. Yeah, he'd say no. Bring it out as theories of surplus value. Or another time, the Grundrisse. Or then he said Capital Volume 1. So he was saying bring it out as a book. A book, yes. A book, yes. It's telling you, in fact, yes, to bring it out as a book, yes. That's right. I was trying to avoid that word. For your sake. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to say to the assembled people here? I'd like to say all three of these magicians have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. Well, I'm sure these people will change it, not immediately though, because sometimes I say that to people. I say to people, change the world. And people immediately think they want to change things, so they get up and they leave. No, it's true. I've known whole audiences react like that. Sometimes even before I've said it. And yeah. So anyway, thanks very much, Karl Marx. Thank you. Thank you. I'm performing here today. It's obviously it's very unusual. Different sort of time, and I must tell you that there was a time a little while ago, a few years ago, when I I almost decided to give this up because I thought, you know, what socialism is on the wane now. Can I really keep going with it? Can I get enough? And I said this was about a time when privatisation everything was being privatised, and I was thinking about what else could be privatised. And then I thought, you know, dreams. Everybody dreams, don't they? And some people have good dreams, some people have bad dreams, but that's not correlated with your income. Which doesn't fit in with the market system, does it really, in many ways? Because if you're going to have good dreams, you should have to pay for them. Otherwise, you've got no incentive, have you? And somebody should be making a profit out of the dreams. That's the way in which these things work. And we could even these things out. I could set up Dreams PLC. So if you want to have a good dream, you pay in advance. And I thought, yeah, I could be the one. Instead of doing all this, I could be the one. And then I was thinking about all this, how I could build this empire of dreams. And then in the distance, I saw a mist. And the mist turned into a cloud. And as I stood and watched, each drop of vapour turned into a face. The crowd moved around me in laughter and song, with eyes that were bright and voices strong. Each face separate and distinct, though all in common purpose linked. But who were these people? Somehow I knew that if only I guessed, my guess would be true. And so I decided that one band of figures from centuries past were Winstanley's diggers, proclaiming all folk were of equal worth to share in the treasures of the earth. Some Luddites were holding a great hammer high. They've been slandered by history, but I could see why they'd set about smashing their masters' machines, which were not tools of progress, but used as a means to steal from these people their labour and skill and ensure they were bent to their master's will. I'm sure they were bent to their master's will. Some faces I knew. Paul Robeson was giving full voice to a song that said Joe Hill was living. Joe smiled and agreed that in each mine and mill where the workers were struggling, his spirit lived still. Mary Seacole was resting from easing the pain of those men sent to die so their rulers might gain. She's forgotten by history. Her skin wasn't pale, though she healed just as surely as Nurse Nightingale. Harriet Tubman, Karen Silkwood, who died fighting nuclear might. Blair Peach, killed by police for supporting the right to protest against fascism. Others who died fighting fascist battalions in Spain's countryside. There was Sacco, Vanzetti. There were suffragettes too, with the miners and match girls, and some people who had been friends of mine. They died with much still to give, but they all used their lives to find new ways to live, gazing in awe on this great panorama. I wondered what part it could play in my drama. And then as I wondered, they all spoke in chorus. There's something, they said, that we quite like done for us. We are dead, and our life's work is not yet fulfilled, though we all tried in some different manner to build a world that is decent and honest and fair, where we all get what's needed and what's left we share. But the world isn't like that. That's clear and that's plain. And we're not blaming you. But don't make it in vain that we lived lives of struggle. Continue the fight. While you live, you can change things. We know that that's right. And I looked and I saw that in each of their eyes stood a part of a new world. And to my surprise, I could now see what they saw, and so understood. We become fully human by working for good. We may fail, but it's better to know that we've been a part of humanity, not a machine. I stood there renewed, thinking, no, life's not tragic. Then they piped up again and said, show us some magic. So finally this afternoon, I'm going to do a trick which I'm going to use this newspaper to illustrate one of the basic principles of socialism, which in some ways is very simple. The idea of from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, and socialism is also in that wonderful song, the Internationale. The basic idea of socialism, the Internationale, unites the human race. Unites the human race. It's a wonderful idea. And of course that song celebrates the International, the first International. That organisation set up over 150 years ago in London, England, where people from all over the world came together to try to set up an organisation to bring about a world change, revolution, a different sort of world, and they all got together thinking about how they might do that. But there was a problem, wasn't there? Because it was only after a few months that the whole thing split, didn't it? Over the question of the Labour theory of value, I think. A big split. And that's been the history of the left, hasn't it? It's another split after that. So there was a second International, which split over the question of whether to support the First World War. And then there was the third International, the Communist Party's International. And the fourth International, of course, made a habit of an art, really, of splitting. And then we got all these, we got splits of one sort or another going on all the time, and not necessarily always with socialists. And so you end up with all these little groups, one after another, splitting and wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be good if we could just say those magic words? Mass action for a radical transformation of society, from a society based primarily on profit to a society based on human need. And if they could work... See, there's always one little group, but you're never going to convince them, are you? Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you. And I'm so sorry that Colin wasn't here. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Two things. First of all, to encourage people who haven't yet looked at this amazing collection of photographs around the walls, plus comments and tributes and many other things from people sent in the last couple of weeks to honour Colin's memory, and I do recommend that people take the time. You'll have seen some of the pictures, of course. I also wanted to just add a couple of things that I think have somehow slipped from what's been said so far. I'm Jeff Brown, and I describe myself, along with others, as one of Colin's younger brothers in Manchester. We were, if you like, all sons and daughters of Cliff, but actually in Manchester, Colin was the senior figure. Colin actually came to Manchester on his own in 1963 as a revolutionary socialist, and by the end of the 60s, there was an organisation of 100. It wasn't something which Colin would have claimed to have done all on his own, but it's important to recognise that Colin was the person who started it and actually shaped it and continued to shape it throughout his life. I think it's also important to recognise that Colin was criminally modest, and that actually you have to really dig to find Colin very often. I've got here one of the classics of the history of black politics, black power in Britain, the making of the black working class in Britain, and by Ron Ramdin. And on page 441, there is a fascinating description of a group of Manchester International Socialists, which actually is Colin basically, who are organising the first march against police brutality in this city, which is then sabotaged by the Dean of the Cathedral and the Chief Constable. And the point is that it was actually Colin who makes those links with black activists, with people who have become leaders of the black community in Manchester, people like Barry Edwards. It's Colin, and yet actually when it comes to it, how do you actually find out that Colin played the key role in pulling it all together? You might ask, why is Jeff Brown wearing a blacklisted t-shirt? I'm a teacher. I don't think I was ever blacklisted in my life, except I am on the official Northwest Employers blacklist along with 2,000 other names. And believe it or not, so is Colin. And you know, the reality is that actually it came down to Colin printing out probably more leaflets with his name and address on it than anybody else in this city. This was in Moss Side, when Eva and Colin lived in Moss Side at Surrey Street. The Romeo there had a reputation that crisscrossed the city. And it wasn't just the fact that everybody used that Romeo, it was also that out of that Romeo came rank and file bulletins in the building industry, rank and file industry, the printing industry, teaching, students, and you name it. And that was actually, Colin wasn't just the person who made sure it all could happen. Colin was the person, and I speak personally, as somebody who actually taught us how to write. I still write every sentence and check it the way Colin taught me. Go through it, see how many words you can take out of it, and keep the sense. And my God, it always works. And if anybody wants to follow that example, I can't recommend it too strongly. My point is that this was the big brother, the elder brother, who actually taught us so much. And actually, the fact this room is full is a simple proof of that matter, that fact, that he was somebody who consistently organised. And I'll just make one final point, which is not a few people are wearing anti-Nazi League badges in this room. What people almost certainly don't know is that the Anti-Nazi League initially was built in this city by Colin, the person who crucially made all those horrible phone calls you have to make to people whose politics are so different, building the United Front, you know, talking to the MPs and all the rest of them. Actually, you might remember, got a huge list of notables, but actually they included, you know, Pat Crerand, an international footballer playing for Scotland, and a United player. Dave Watson did the same for City. These are people that Colin pulled in to the anti-Nazi, which we then, some younger folk could then go and build on the ground, and you know, a huge movement. But it was Colin who actually pulled it to go there, and just, you know, and he carried this right the way through. You know, that when Unite Against Fascism was launched in the city, and we had 500 people in the town hall, you know, launching it. All the great, the good, and the rest of it were there. Who pulled those people together? It was Colin, who actually had done the hour upon hour upon hour on the phone, making sure that people would actually cover every conceivable, you know, faith and whatever you were talking about in terms of trade union representations and so forth, to make sure that this was something that everybody recognised showed the unity against fascism in the city. I think Ian's going to say a little bit more now, but I will just mention, just in case it needs repeating, that we'd still have the fascists. And if Colin was going to be anywhere on Saturday, he'd be at Media City at 11 o'clock, where unfortunately Tommy Robinson is coming. Do join us there.
Yeah, I'm Ian Allinson. I'm one of Colin's many friends and comrades in Manchester, and wanted to say a little bit about Colin's more recent activism. I mean, since 2014, Colin's been involved in building RS21, where his experience of building from an even smaller group, a group of one, as Jeff was just explaining, has been so precious to us. And I think there's a lot of people here young enough to be Colin's grandkids who would recognise in particular the absolute commitment he had to encouraging and listening to and learning from and teaching young comrades in particular. It's just been absolutely phenomenal. And locally, of course, we benefited from the sheer impossibility of having a boring meeting with Colin in the room, who had that way of dropping a question into a discussion if there was any danger of that. I mean, some of the other things he's done more recently, for a while we were having what perhaps should have been called bread, soup and the state discussions around the famous kitchen table, where, you know, on a number of occasions bringing people together to discuss different aspects of his particular interest in the state at Colin and Eva's house. It was in their living room that we launched Manchester to Calais, the Migrant Solidarity Initiative that raised lots of money, food, clothes and so on to support people, while at the same time raising the arguments for migrant rights and against borders. And, you know, just last winter, Colin was down at our freezing cold picket lines on the other side of the city at 7 o'clock in the morning. And most apologetic that at 78 he wasn't able to do it every day. he's been with Eva, as people have said, protesting against fracking and climate change. So at the same time as continuing his writing, his thinking, and speaking, his activism was absolutely very much part of Colin, absolutely to the end. I wanted to read a few little bits from Colin's 1967 response to Ian Birchall, which really just struck a chord with me for the sort of person Colin was. He wrote, "We have to abandon that destructive tradition developed by Trotsky's epigones of personal unpleasantness as a means of expressing political differences. Had this been the tradition of the Bolsheviks, the tradition of ultra-hardness, the Bolsheviks would never have conquered state power. We have to accept people as they are if we're to change them. A personally friendly and open style of behaviour is required." And he went on, "Marxist theory is a flexible instrument, not a rod of iron. This is its strength." And I think, and you can see if you look at the fantastic display all around the walls, that this really shaped his organising. It was, if you like, people-centred, not task or event-centred. He was patient, he built political relationships with people. It wasn't short-term and instrumental where he picked people up and dropped them. If there was some minor disagreement, he would keep arguing and engaging and trying to work with people. And I think, reading around that stuff, and like Jeff, I would encourage people to have a look at those displays. Colin set a standard in terms of that integrity and honesty and that way of behaving with people that we can all try to live up to a little bit. The thing I wanted to end on really is on one of the displays that's just around the corner at the back there. There's what they call a word cloud, which is built out of all the letters and messages and tributes and things that people sent in, and it's the words that you used, and just some of them: twinkle, thinker, lovely, kindness, friend, humour. There's so many words, so many great words that I think said so much about Colin.
Sally, are you going to give us a song?
Song? No, I was going to give you the story. A bit more alcohol before I start singing to the crowd. Hello. My perspective on Colin is more personal and less political, so my contribution here is a shift in gear, but I hope to a Colin that you'll know and recognise. In the early 80s, I met my future partner, John Charlton, moved up to the north and got to know his friends, including Colin. And later, a group of us started going on a holiday once a year for a week. A sort of shifting group. And a lot of pictures from these holidays on the rolling shots that you were looking at. Colin often slightly on the edge of the group, watching, thinking. The holidays provided Colin with a wonderful opportunity to get into competitive master chef mode. Fantastic, elaborate cooking for which he would pack a pasta machine in the back of his car, or bring a KitchenAid, and always knives and cutlery and the right equipment. And the food would be beautifully constructed, but there was a fair amount of sort of edgy tension that went into this too. And what Colin really wanted to do was not cook for everybody. That was his singing for his supper. What he really wanted to do was talk. So we would walk and talk. He would read a book and then talk about it. Anything but cook and talk. Cooking, no talking. The piece I brought to you, though, is from an earlier period when we went on collective holidays with small children, because Colin's and Eva's daughters all just about tied in with our children who came on afterwards. And we had family holidays at my grandmother's. My grandmother was a working writer, a Scottish aristocrat, an Edwardian girl and with many Edwardian ways still preserved. A great hostess, somebody who believed in foraging, but she never learnt to cater, so other people foraged, and had a Scottish baronial mansion. Can you imagine Colin transplanted to this environment? And there was no question of him cooking for his supper in this environment. So what he did was what the guests did, which is he gardened. And then, because Colin's a bright lad and doesn't like to hide his lights too much under a bushel, you know, you have to see that he's got some talents. He wrote a poem about his gardening, and this is what I'm bringing you. And bear in mind that this is an English literature graduate. He precedes this poem with I would have said this is probably late 18th century introduction. Wild gardening, he writes, in which certain shocking particulars, hitherto concealed, are brought to the public notice. This sunny spot was once much darker, till it was cleared by Colin Barker. He burned the gorse, consumed spirea, while suffering from a mild diarrhea. Forgive this sad, afflicted sinner. He'd naught but sea trout, my grandmother had been foraging again, for his dinner. He sought advice from Dr. Machin, that's me. In haste, she urged him, change your kitchen. So, stoking up his fire with brambles, of which there were a large amount, he toasted bread he bought at Campbell's, the local shop, with nothing fishy, Eva would have been pleased, nothing herbal, but joints of stuffed and roasted gerbil. The background to that is that we came across these, we thought, wild gerbils in the West Highland. What had happened was that my grandmother had employed a gardener. It was that kind of space. Her gardener's son had offered, I'll do it, miss, to take the school class gerbils home for Easter. And then, as you can imagine, one day they'd been brought out to play and they'd escaped. So they were feral in the woods. So I don't think he actually roasted any gerbils. Moral. If you would be wise and wealthy, ensure your gardener's Tom is healthy. Dated the 3rd of August, 1984.
I'm looking round to see if anybody feels inspired, and failing that, I shall put the music back on.
John does.
John, I thought there was somebody I'd forgotten. Just a small, subtle thing.
Well, I'm John Charlton. My political life was also starting in the IS roughly at the same time as Colin's. I was in Newcastle then. Later I was in Leeds, and latterly in Newcastle again. But during the Leeds period, I was very close to Colin. I saw a lot of Colin, and I benefited a lot from the regular discussions which lots of people have talked about. I remember one mannerism of Colin's. Colin was somebody actually who didn't actually like disagreeing, but in his heart he always knew he had to disagree. And he usually would say something like this, having heard your statement. I'm not quite sure I agree with that. And then, wham it comes. Well, I thought a lot about what I would like to say today and bring something about Colin. And I wanted to refer to a part of Colin's work which is probably less well known, and it oughtn't to be. And that is his work as a book reviewer. Colin wrote reviews and was for a long time the reviews editor of International Socialism Journal. In the period between 1964, when he wrote his first review, and 1977, when he wrote his last review, he wrote 77 reviews. It's a considerable number, isn't it? I mean, 77 reviews. And they're quite interesting and distinctive in different ways. One of the things that is obvious from the beginning is his range of interest is absolutely remarkable. The last few days I actually started reading through them. And I discovered this, you see, that he reviews big books. He liked big books. And he devoured big books. I mean, he's an extraordinarily fast reader. That was a really amazing thing. And you get a sense of that quite often in the things he's written, because the number of references in his work are phenomenal, you know. But the range, you see, right from the beginning, he's writing reviews of books of drama, like Bertolt Brecht's Diary. Colin has a review on that. He writes on, obviously, you might say, political economy across a wide range. He writes on history. He writes on labour history. He writes on Africa. I bet nobody knew that. He wrote on Africa. He wrote on the Russian Revolution. He wrote on Mao. But his big focus, I now realise, was on something which was going to prove to be the kind of centre of his life, really. And that was the labour movement and the agencies around the labour movement which shape the way the labour movement is. And there are probably, I think, of the 75 I mentioned, there may be as many as 30 books reviewed in that area. And it starts ever so early. Now it starts, you see, in 1964. And between 64 and 69, he has produced something like, I think it's 28 reviews on substantial books. Now, I talked about the range, but the next thing actually is the quality of the reviews. Because he didn't dash them off, it's obvious. Or if he did dash them off, he was even cleverer than we think he was. Because the reviews are deep reviews. They're considered, he considers the books, and he doesn't slam enemies directly, and there are plenty of enemies. So a review of a very famous book, many, many moons ago, was a book about the Fawley productivity agreements in the oil industry back in the early 60s, and that was one of the very first productivity bargains. Later, we all became aficionados of productivity bargains. I mean, it became a big thing for the IS at the time. But Colin, I think, had spotted something important that was changing in industrial relations, and he cottoned onto it. But I like very much the subtitle at the top of the review. It is Fog at Fawley. Fog at Fawley. And I noticed this on many of the reviews. He has an extremely snappy phrase or sentence at the top of a review, which is telling you quite a lot about it, actually. A lot encapsulated in that notion of four or five. Well, I can't go on about this too long, but I also was thinking this, that we're talking about a man who at that time is 24, 25 when he's engaging with this stuff. But it's already pretty obvious that he has got a very deep knowledge of the material that he's considering. And I reflect as well, you see, on his origins. Where on earth did this come from? Because as you know from earlier today, he didn't come from a political home. Now, if, interestingly, the older people here might want to compute their own histories and see, did you come from a political home? Had you heard political discussion, political debate at home? I find that lots of people did, but it's interesting those who didn't, you know, and what actually happens there. Because, as you also know from earlier today, Colin started by studying English literature. Now, I got my first whiff of Colin's knowledge of English literature in probably the first long period I spent with him, and that was in a car. He drove me from London after a national meeting to Manchester, where I picked up the train and went on to Leeds. But I remember him talking about the English literature part of his life. But I had a brilliant example of it somewhat later, when Eva and Colin had come over to spend some time with us in Leeds. And Colin also did actually quite like a toke. Once he had a toke, something was released inside him, and there was one evening when he gave us the prelude from Piers Plowman. Piers Plowman, you know, the early English poem, and he gave it in early English. And somehow, this is in 1980 or something like that, he'd recalled word for word in early English. And so, you know, but he makes this transfer from literature to sociology, to business studies, all of this in a very, very short space of time. And I found that wonderful, really, and quite remarkable. Well, okay, I mustn't go on too long. I'll just say something else, really. And in a way, I think it's probably about his character and his death. I started by saying something about Colin and disagreement. One thing is for sure, he did disagree. He had a lot of cause for disagreement with comrades all over the place. But I would say that he disagreed with grace. I think he always disagreed with grace, and his arguments were conducted with grace. And if there will ever be a more graceful end to life than Colin's was, it will be utterly remarkable. Thank you.
Kate?
Hi everyone. In a way, I'm sorry to speak on an occasion as sad as this, because during the funeral and the wake I felt like a lot of things have been said that were really important about Colin, and that his amazing intellectual capacity, but someone pointed out that actually not many of his young comrades have spoken today, and so we haven't really shown what he meant to us, like people who, millennials, we've got all these news stories about us. Don't know if you've read them, but we've got all these news stories about how we only care about mobile phones and shit. And actually, what I really wanted to come out and say was that even though I've only known Colin about 4 years, he has come to mean a hell of a lot to me. And this is the first time that I've lost a comrade, and it's hit me so deeply, largely because while Colin was around, you felt that something was happening. While Colin was around, you felt like he must be changing something by either action at the front of a demo right up to last year, or by theory influencing hundreds of people around the world. And I've heard people across like thousands of miles away saying they were influenced by Colin's writings. And either he was researching history, but he was also making it, right? And when I came to Manchester about a year ago, he was at my first Manchester demonstration, which was against Jarl's Wood, the detention centre, and with Eva, and they were both right there at the front, making me believe that it's possible to remain committed to socialism and to the potential of human freedom for the whole of your life. That made me think that we can all do this, right? He was there for so long that it shows us that it is possible for us all to stay involved and to stay committed to the same basic principles for 60 plus years. And that's been what's been lovely about today, hearing how he carried that through his entire life. But this is to celebrate, not just to mourn. That's why we're in this room. And what I wanted from this, and what I hope for everyone, is that we come away from today feeling like Colin is carried with us. His voice is still there in all our heads, and his belief, that final belief that he sent around in his final email to so many of us, that the world can be different, and this is the wager on which he has based his whole life. that we carry that with us and continue to fight for the things that he was so passionate about and that we're so passionate about. Basically, I just wanted to give my love to him and his family, and also say that please stay committed. If you're committed now, be as committed as Colin was. That's basically it.
Hi, my name is Aidan Rowe, and I've had permission from Eva to tell you this story. I mean, I've known Colin since about 1970. Been to union conferences with him. Have sat around the table. I mean, in many ways, I found today an incredible day, but also an emotional, total roller coaster. And the roller coasters go down. And this is a story which I was trying to think of the funny incidents I've had with Colin. And this one goes back to about 1976. And I was at that time working at what was then the Poly, MMU. I left there in the late 90s. And I got a phone call from Colin. And he said, Aidan, he said, I've got a real problem. Someone's given me some dope seeds. And I put them into my greenhouse on the allotment. And I said, oh. He said, the trouble is, I had a word with the guy next door who's a pensioner, and I told him they were tomato plants. And if you remember, some of you can remember the summer of '76, it was a very hot summer, and he said, my tomato plants are now going through the roof of the greenhouse and coming down on the other side of the glass. And well, he came back from home, and the pensioner who had the allotment said, here, your tomato plants are doing well, lad. I mean, not seen them go through the roof before, you know. And so he said, what the hell am I going to do? He said, because if anybody finds this out, it's the end of my job. So it was agreed that they would be harvested and dried, and then had to get rid of them. And there will be one or two people in this room, and I'm one of them, who got little sealed packets through the internal mail of Manchester Polytechnic. And we were never told for years where they came from. And I can reveal that they came from Colin Barker. Bless you. Thank you.
My name's Rob, and I guess I first met Colin almost 15 years ago. And I wasn't going to speak, and I'm not going to speak for long. There's two anecdotes that I keep on, ever since Colin's death, keep on coming back into my mind. The first is, I was a student in the university. I'd never read Shakespeare, but I still never read any of Colin's books. And I remember sitting in a meeting with our then organiser and feeling a little bit sheepish and being sort of gently told off as she'd looked through the plan for the university meetings that year and realised that out of, I think, 24 planned meetings, we tried to invite Colin to 17 of them as our primary speaker. And the reason that we kept on trying to invite Colin wasn't because any of us had read any of his great works or any kind of his particular theoretical contributions, is that he seemed to offer a connection to a world of possibility that we hadn't experienced ourselves. He seemed interested in absolutely everything. So we invited him to speak on, I think, virtually any topic we just kind of assigned his name to. But I also reflect on why did Colin make... There was lots of people that were from that generation that we knew, lots of people that came in and spoke. What was it that set Colin apart from them and meant that we kept on wanting him to come back? And I think, having spent much more time with Colin over the last couple of years since forming RS21, the thing which I think reflects on him best is it wasn't what he was interested in, is he was always interested in what we had to say as well, in a way that very few people of his stature really were in quite the same sense. So he was both this kind of effervescence of possibility in what he talked about, but also that sense of kind of patiently listening and feeling like what you said had particular value. And I'll never forget the first time I've never really written very much. I did a chemistry degree. I'm not a great political thinker. The first time I wrote a long article, the main bit of feedback I got was from Colin. The main bit of encouragement I got to continue writing was from him. And to give you a sense of his modesty, I forever remember being struck by the fact that when he wrote things that were new, he would send them out to comment. And he wouldn't send them out to comment to, I'm sure he did send them out to academics and people in his field. He also sent them out to the people that he just knew. And I remember him asking what did I think about this article he'd written on the states and kind of social movements. And just how do you respond? How do you feel like you have anything to add in that moment? And I suppose the wonderful thing about Colin is when you went to see him and Eva, that he always made you feel like you did have something to say, and that the things that you thought mattered were themselves interesting, and in finding them interesting, he made them more interesting and allowed you to explore your ideas in a way that I'm not sure I've ever met anyone else that had. And I'll forever remember him saying that he didn't understand how people of my generation had stayed believing in the ideas of socialism from below, having never seen the events of 1968. And I think one of the tragedies is that Colin never really realised that the reason that we were able to stay true to that vision was because he'd injected that sense of what it was like in his conversations on so many things. He transmitted that sense of possibility and that it could happen again in a way that I've never really met anyone else in quite the same sense. And the last time I went to see him and Eva was, I think, a few months before he died, and he was still talking about, with great excitement, about things that were happening in Latin America, things that I'm ashamed to say I didn't know. You kind of pretend that you nodded along thinking that you'd also read the news, and then quickly went off afterwards to find out about it. And I'm not sure that our experiences over the last couple of years are enough to produce someone else like Colin, but you'd like to think that the events in the future will produce many more Colin Barkers.
My name's Bill Roberts. I'm from Chicago, and I thought it was important that someone from the International Socialist Organization and also a member of the Haymarket Books Board attend this solidarity and celebration of Colin's life. So that's why Deborah and I wanted to be here with all of you. I just want to share a couple of little remembrances over this last year of Colin, which I think illustrates, as many of you have spoken of. When we were planning Colin and Eva came to, we're coming to socialism, our big event, like Marxism here in London, and he was going to speak, but we were also planning a trip together and to Juneau, Alaska. And so before they came, Colin was trying to book the ferry that John and Sally and Deborah and I had all booked on. And he was having some trouble, and he emailed me, your boat leaves we leave at the same time, but we arrive at a different hour. How is that possible? So I just threw out, because I knew this would provoke Colin into something interesting. I said, well, maybe you're on a ghost ship. That did provoke something. We had 3 or 4 email exchanges where we built this story of the ghost ship arriving in Juneau at a different time and somehow getting together. But it was just an example of his inventive and whimsical kind of approach to a very, sort of mundane kind of organizational question of how you get together from Bellingham to Juneau. But there was, after socialism, even Colin stayed with us the following week, and we did some things. And Colin was having difficulty walking, and it was slow, and he was having trouble breathing and so forth. Unfortunately, we were on the second floor. apartment, and it took him a while to get up to the apartment. But we decided that we would like to go to the Mexican Museum and see the displays there in near South Chicago. So we went to the museum, and because Colin was moving very slowly then, he would take a long time at each painting or exhibit. And he came to this one painting. It was a bit bizarre. It was, I guess the best way to describe it, somewhat surrealistic. And he stood there a long time. And so I went up to him and I said, what are you looking at here? And he went into a long analysis. What was this person dreaming? And why was he dreaming this and that? And I just thought it was so interesting that Colin would take that time and actually give credit to what I thought was not a very good painting. But he had that imagination. And I think one of the ways that sums up Colin's life, and I take this from Marx, that nothing human was alien to him.
I'm not going to say anything very long or very profound, but I just wanted to say something which might be slightly different to what other people have said. I remember Colin as a listener. I remember Colin as someone who sat there quietly for a long time listening to what other people said, and then suddenly came in with a devastating question. And that, I just, what came to mind was a meeting with Terry Eagleton many years ago. I mean, it's probably about 20 years ago in London. And Terry Eagleton spoke for ages and ages, and for me anyway, he was absolutely brilliant speaker. He was really convincing. He was really wonderful. He really painted a picture, and I was carried away with Terry Eagleton's analysis. And very quickly after he'd finished speaking, Colin put up his hand and just said, "Isn't this a case of the philosophers have interpreted the world?" And he didn't even finish the quote. And that's all he said. And it, you know, Terry Eagleton, big time academic, but it completely then turned the conversation around just by one very small intervention, one small question, one small thought. Having listened carefully in a way that perhaps the rest of us hadn't, he changed the whole debate. So I wanted to remember Colin as someone that listened. That was all.